Good morning, Europe. Hello, world. Whether you're having your breakfast on the Azores, your lunch in Bucharest, or you have your dinner in New Zealand, I would like to give you a very warm welcome from Santarém, Portugal, for the first Farming Biodiversity Summit. And together with the FFA regional meeting yesterday, this is the very first hybrid event we are organizing. It's at the same time a meeting in person and a meeting online, making use of the FFA platform. This meeting is organized under the auspices of the Portuguese presidency of the European Union, and this meeting was made possible because of an excellent cooperation between the European Landowners Organization and CAP. And they got the support of their partners for this event, which are CropLife, Concili, and Travel Tomorrow. And of course, I should not forget our media partner, AgroPortal. As this is a hybrid event, we will have speakers as well present here on stage, as well as online from their offices or homes. That can cause slightly delays, but we are all getting used to this because we are making more and more use of those digital tools in the past year. Later today, I will be assisted on stage by Duarte Mira, CAP head of the office in Brussels. And I would like to remind you that, as always, we would like to keep this event as interactive as possible. So, for the people present in the room over here, I would say, if you have questions, please, you can ask them. We are not running around with a microphone, but you have the possibility to make use of the website www.ffa.tv. And there you have the possibility to post your question, and we will see it here on the screen, and so you can interfere with our speakers. For those ones watching online, look below me, and you will see an interactive box where you can write your questions, and it's up to you. You can do that in Portuguese, or you can do that in English. Ask your questions for our panelists, and I will make sure that they are able to answer them. Today, we are making use of the FFA platform, which is an initiative of ELO and Syngenta, and we are doing that in partnership with TNC, WWF, Cargill, Thought for Food, the Chicago Council for Global Affairs, and John Deere. And I would say, please do visit the FFA 2021 platform, which will be available after the meeting, and you can make use of the website www.forumforagriculture.com. I would like to remind all of you here present, but also at home, that this meeting will be recorded. It will be shared later on the ELO and CAP websites. Now, this meeting is organized under very strict COVID rules, as they are valid in Portugal. So people in the room, they are seated on indicated seats, making sure that you're remaining at a safe social distance. So please remain at your seat throughout the session. You will find hand sanitizers all over the place, and we have to ask you to wear your masks at all times. Ladies and gentlemen, I first of all would like to ask our hosts for today, which is Eduardo Oliveira Souza and Thierry Delescay, to come on the stage.
Morning.
Good morning.
It's here.
You can take the seat over here.
Thank you very much.
And Thierry can take the seat next to you.
Thank you very much.
Eduardo Oliveira Souza will give us some opening remarks. He is the CAP president and our host for this meeting. Eduardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to participate on this and co-organize with ELO and other partners in the sequence of what happened yesterday. And so welcome everybody. Thank you very much for being part of this first big event that we are having live and living here in Santarém.
Yeah.
Because I'm in Portugal, I can transfer my language to Portuguese. Is it possible? I can.
It's your home country, it's your home
Okay,
language,
thank you very
so
much.
please do so.
It will be much more easier for me to speak some words to everybody. Muito bom dia a todos.
Good morning, everybody.
Prazer receber-vos
It really is a pleasure to welcome you here in Santarém. I would like to welcome you all in the name of Portuguese farmers. I think we're living a transition phase when we're able to get back to what we call a normal life, people around us, and I think that this is that first step in that right direction, getting back to normalcy. I would also like to greet all the LO members that, along with us, have organized the summit on the heels of what happened yesterday, co-hosted with these two Portuguese organizations that are also affiliated to LO. I think organizing FFA was very successful, so thank you, NAC, and thank you, NBC. Today, we are holding here a high-level conference. António Guterres, UN Secretary General, will address us, and we also have a message from our very own President of the Republic, Marcelo de Sousa. Unfortunately, not live here with us, Maria do Céu Antunes, Minister for Agriculture. And I know that last night, negotiations for the revised CAP were done and dusted, but apparently it's still going on. That chapter, one of the chapters of the negotiations is still open. And so I think her message will not bear good news, well, at least the good news we all would like to hear. Now, the revision of the CAP this time around is a bit different. We have a new CAP coming up. Biodiversity as a part of this wider and global packet that goes by the name of Green Deal. Biodiversity now has more weight, carries more ambitions. Ambitions that the EU wants to transfer into the agriculture policy. So we will have to get seriously more involved in these environmental questions and biodiversity in specific. Europe is known as the old continent. And it's true that it's one part of the planet that has been populated for hundreds of thousands of years, and just by that fact that mankind has stayed there for so long has obviously shaped Europe. I'm sure that there's some exceptions in top of mountains or something, but we don't have what we would call this pristine nature. There is a sort of a marriage between biodiversity and agricultural practices, and just the two of them have always gone hand in hand. So, for instance, threatened birds, or they are now dependent on these agricultural habitats, for instance. Let's talk about the last 50 years. It's not scientifically proven, but let's talk about the last 50 years. Agriculture has intensified, and this, for obvious reasons, also impacts how biodiversity evolves, impacts some areas more than others, obviously, but mankind intensifying everything, be it agriculturally or in the urban areas, it does cause something to change. It does have an impact, and those impacts have to be managed. Now, in this framework, how does this connect? In Southern Europe, and let me now dwell a little bit in why we're so interested in bringing this topic to this meeting here. We are going through some dire straits now. What's happening is the desert is coming from the south to the north. So in southern Europe, water usage was already a very important topic. Nowadays, it's still even more important. It's fundamental. It's borderline between being able to practice agriculture or not. And what the worst thing that can happen to biodiversity is for people to just abandon land. And for that not to happen, we need economic sustainability that ties into environmental sustainability, and obviously include in the whole package social sustainability. And also this topic now is being revised or studied in the revision of the CAP. So diversifying is extremely important. That's why when we talk about intensive agriculture, usually we think that's a threat against the nature, but it's exactly the other way around. Intensive agriculture can bring down the impact of other types of agriculture, and in that way take better care of biodiversity, increase the habitats, and have birds, for instance, being able to spread, evolve, nest. So it sounds like a paradox, but it's not. So by definition, we're producing more with less territory. But to follow this route, we need to look back in time, look back to history here. Produce more with less, or less with more, rather, with more fertilizers, with more plant protection products, phytosanitary products. But now we are at the dawn of a new age. We need to produce more with less. But with less what? Less resource usage, less water usage. We're not talking about reducing the whole overall volume of water, but just 1 unit of water per production, as it were. We need to use less products. And that what does that mean? Two things. To be able to use new technologies and to be able to go forward and make the most out of those profitability models that are just more advanced these days. Let me find the right words for this. Southern Europe. We have different types of agriculture, extensive agriculture, very particular to Portugal and Spain, the so-called montados, where we produce cork, something that in Portugal is just off the charts. In Spain, also with the montados, they have something similar to the oak tree. It's so montado in Portugal is also forest, and it's very rich in biodiversity terms. But taken by itself, it won't survive. They need close to them that so-called intensified agriculture. So to produce more with less. So that's why in this Europe that's so much diversified, different from north to the south of the continent, and even in a small country like Portugal, completely different from the northern area to the southern area, from the coast area to the land area. So all the discussions that were taking place around CAP, they need to transfer their responsibility to the country so that they can adapt everything to their own regions, how they farm that land, how they occupy that territory. So farmers are the main actors for change here and are the main interested parties here for biodiversity, and to include that in their own lives. Agriculture and biodiversity are just married. That's been the case. That's always been the case. It's going to continue to be the case. And by saying this, I hope that we'll have a very interesting session today. Thank you.
Eduardo, whenever you are speaking about agriculture, whenever you are speaking about the link between agriculture and biodiversity, I can feel that passion. A person who is sharing that passion with you is Secretary General of the European Landowners Organization, Thierry de Lescaille, and he's our second host for today. Thierry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jürgen, and I have to thank particularly Eduardo, because he is paving the way and fencing the debate for the day very clearly. You put all the challenge on the map, so we know what we have to discuss today. That's great. But I would like first to thank our partners, and especially all the ones who are making this day possible. I'm not thinking only to the ones who are here in the room in Portugal and all organizing the techniques, and I really thank them because they are doing a great job, but also the one who make that possible in other countries and in Brussels or in London. And of course, great thanks to Eduardo and the CAP. And I should thank also the president of the Biodiversity Countryside and Hunting Intergroup, Alvaro Amaro. He said that he will join us. I'm not able to see if he's in the room, but we should have the opportunity to discuss those themes, as he's doing also the job in the European Parliament with his own team. As you know, Yellow is co-chairing the secretariat of this intergroup, which allows us to share 10 to 12 meetings on a yearly basis in the Parliament. So it's, and you understand it, also it's a very special pleasure to delivering some open words now at this first Farming and Biodiversity Summit, especially the day the CAP is coming to an agreement. We know that in Parliament, the trilogue is landing and is not landing that badly for the interest of farmers. So let's be positive and let's have a very positive look towards the future and adapt our business to this event, to this situation. So for me, and I have the pleasure to know you, Eduardo, for more than 25 years, which is a pleasure and a non-pleasure, because it means that we are getting older. But we've been co-working together on this biodiversity challenge. It has been for Yellow always a central issue alongside the business of farmers and foresters. Let's be clear, a good biodiversity complements the management of the landscape, providing countless ecosystem services to support our environment and our businesses, and to boost our quality of life. It is integral to our economies and even cultural identities. It is not something we want to lose, at the contrary. But nobody should not take into account that the farmer, in order to make this management possible, has to be in the black and not in the red. What means it needs to be profitable in order to use the proper solutions. For this reason, I'm delighted to be with you and to see such a high level of interest for this farming summit and biodiversity, with a wide-ranging group of stakeholders, from farmers to land managers, all the way to policymakers, where we can move the discussion forward or to optimize our strategies to create systems where not only our biodiversity loss decline, but reverse. And we are actors of that challenge. To do so, we need, of course, to discuss and refine practical solutions on one hand, and on the other hand, we need to explore the efficacy of our policies. It's nice to have a policy, but if policy is just a dream, we are nowhere. We need concrete solutions, and the CAP will only provide incentive of goals, but we need to do our share of the job, by definition. For us to do this, the three pillars of sustainability need to be respected. And I remember you, the economic viability at the same level of the environmental protection and the social equity. And this will make it possible. But we have never to forget that farming is a business on itself, and that farmers need respect. And sometimes in political debates, this is challenged. And we farmers, we feel frustrated. We feel that some peoples are lacking of business when they all believe that we are maybe also lacking of respect to them. We have to find a new solution. We have to find a new balance in our approach with society. As a farmer myself, I know how important it is to bring together not only the right policies, but the right tools and incentives. Therefore, we support this initiative and aim to develop both environment and society. So it's with pleasure and somewhere anxiety I'm awaiting the inputs from our speakers today with the discussion to be pushed forward. But I'm also awaiting your inputs thanks to your question. Don't hesitate to make your points, to address your concern, and to tell us how you feel in front of these new challenges. So it's a very special day because we should not forget the value of nature and biodiversity, more specifically in connection with farming and forestry businesses. And we have to work towards a future with flourishing ecosystem being part of our business. So thanks a lot for your presence, and I'm looking to listen to all of you.
Thank you very much, Thierry. Our next guest is a very prominent man. Antonio Guterres is the UN Secretary General. It's a pity he could not be here today, but he has sent us a message.
I'm pleased to greet the Confederation of Farmers of Portugal and your Biodiversity Summit. Agriculture and biodiversity are interdependent. Your efforts are essential for a healthy planet. I look forward to your contributions to the Food Systems Summit I am convening in September. A healthy planet is critical for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Yet, biodiversity is declining at an unprecedented and alarming rate, and the pressures are intensifying. We are depleting resources faster than nature can replenish them. COVID-19 has further reminded us of the intimate relationship between people and nature. The current crisis provides an opportunity to recover better. We need to protect nature, restore ecosystems, and establish a balance in our relationship with the planet. The rewards will be tremendous. By reversing biodiversity loss, we can improve human health, realize sustainable development, and address the climate emergency. Solutions exist to protect our planet's genetic diversity on land and at sea. Everybody has a part to play. Sustainable lifestyle choices are the key. The choice to live sustainably must be made available to everyone, everywhere. And that means better policies that promote government, business, and individual accountability. We all need to be part of a movement for change. This year, governments will meet in Kunming, China, to agree on an ambitious new global framework for biodiversity. Let us support their mission by advocating for nature. On this International Day for Biodiversity, let us all be part of the solution.
An important message from the UN Secretary General. We have another important message, and that is coming to us from Brussels. And we have Maciej Golubieski. He's head of the cabinet of the EU Commissioner for Agriculture. And I know you have a very busy time at the moment in Brussels, so I will give the floor immediately to you. Floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Dear Mr. President of the Confederation of the Farmers of Portugal, Mr. Secretary General of the European Landowners Association, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, my boss, Commissioner Portugalski, is right now in various bilateral meetings around the Agri-Fish Council, and then moving on to the continuation of the trialogues that will probably go on late into the evening. But I think we're all optimistic that the outcome that will be found will be a very good compromise for the farmers and also for the issue at stake that we're discussing today, which is biodiversity. It is my honor, obviously, to be here with you today and to open the first Farming Biodiversity Summit on behalf of my commissioner. The Commission is fully committed to supporting the conservation of biodiversity. The decline of biodiversity is one of the major environmental challenges of our time and a major source of concern for all of us. This is why the Commission made stopping biodiversity losses one of its priorities in the European Green Deal and in the EU Biodiversity Strategy mentioned today, building also on the Sustainable Development Goals and other important international commitments. The European agricultural sector, and in particular the European farmers, continue to play an essential role in biodiversity conservation and improvement. Unsustainable agricultural practices, as well as the abandonment of agricultural activity, put pressure on biodiversity, whereas sustainable farming practices are part of the solution to conserve and restore ecosystems and habitats, and at the same time ensure that European citizens can rely on a regular and secure supply of healthy and nutritious food. In February 2021, the European Parliament, the Council, and the Commission agreed to introduce a robust financial support for the biodiversity in the 21-27 multi-annual financial framework, including the provision of aiming at achieving at least 7.5% of annual spending under MFF to biodiversity objectives as of 2024, increasing it to 10% in 2026-2027. The new CAP that's being shaped right now, Common Agricultural Policy, will be the major contributor to this ambition. The new CAP puts particular emphasis on achieving higher environmental and biodiversity ambition. The new CAP, being finalized as we speak in the co-decision, now normal procedure, should be fully fit to provide adequate support to sustainable and diversified agriculture and help farmers, including on small farms, in their transition to sustainable farming with enhanced biodiversity protection. Precisely, the Commission proposal aims to foster sharing knowledge, technological innovation, digitization, research and development, designed to encourage more ambitious environmental and biodiversity actions. It also focuses on securing a fair deal and a stable and resilient economic future for farmers, including increasing competitiveness, rebalancing the power in the food chain, an important issue, supporting generational renewal, another hugely important one, but also protecting food and health quality and creating vibrant rural areas. The new CAP will provide a clear and harmonious link with the EU Biodiversity Strategy approach presented in the strategy adopted last year. I would like to highlight its new main elements. The first one, member states will have the flexibility to design the intervention schemes for biodiversity in line with the local needs and priorities. The second one, the new system of conditionality will set a higher baseline with new and ambitious standards related to biodiversity. We will have the new eco-schemes in the CAP's first pillar. They will be dedicated predominantly to the environmental and climate objectives. It will allow targeting a significant amount of public support to specific environmental issues such as biodiversity over a very large number of farms. Finally, rural development support for management commitments will also cover voluntary steps to protect biodiversity, together with non-productive investments, knowledge transfer and innovation. And last but not least, improvements to the CAP performance. Monitoring and evaluation framework post-2022 will include the introduction of new indicators on biodiversity. In order to ensure that the CAP strategic plans, which are now being prepared after the legislation is hopefully done very soon, strategic plans match the EU policy priorities, the Commission has launched a structured dialogue with each member state and provided specific recommendations that you can read, they're public, including on biodiversity. It will continue to provide support to member states in the forthcoming key steps of the CAP plans preparation, I think, by the end of this year, we should have the bulk of them. We should be ready with them at the beginning of next year, to ensure a smooth and quick approval process. The super trialogue that started 2 days ago, ongoing, is expected to reach an ambitious agreement, paving the way towards enhancing the sustainability of our agriculture with stronger benefits for environment and biodiversity, our society, but also, and in particular, for our farmers. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. As you just indicated, there is a super trialogue going on, so you're extremely busy, so you're not going to ask you additional questions. Thank you very much for being here with us, even if digital, and I wish you all of the success in Brussels in whatever you have to do today. Thank you very much.
Good luck to you too. All the best.
Okay, goodbye. And that means that our introductory remarks and our welcoming words are over, and we have to start working. And the first thing we are going to do in session 1 on agriculture and biodiversity, we will discuss challenges and opportunities to deploy systematic solutions. And for that, I have asked a very close friend, which is Xavier Leroux. He's a senior scientist of INRAE. He's also a member of the Academy of Europe, and he's author of the French IPBES report, the Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And let's say we have a long history together within the European Research Area Network, Biodiversa. Xavier, you're an absolute expert in this field, so I would like you to give us, let's say, the first scientific background of today. The floor is yours. I just have to ask you, because we are interpreting, I would say don't talk too fast. That's not only to you, but to all of our speakers, so that we are sure that our interpreters here can follow. Xavier, floor is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jürgen. You can hear me well?
We can hear you excellent.
Okay, so thanks to you and to the organizers for inviting me for this presentation. And I have been asked to give my views on what are the relationships between agriculture and biodiversity, what we are talking about, and the challenges and opportunities when we want to develop solutions to reinforce the link between agriculture and biodiversity. I will start directly by, maybe abruptly, by a question, and asking a question which is, does agriculture impact negatively biodiversity? The answer from science, from research, is very clear. The answer is yes, hugely. Agriculture has a huge impact on biodiversity. And the answer is a more subtle than this. That is, research then recognizes that it's mostly intensive agriculture which has this negative impact, while there are diverse agricultural systems which have diverse and sometimes positive effects on biodiversity. The reasons for intensive agriculture to have this negative effect on biodiversity, it's due to pesticides, fertilizers, drainage, more generally homogenization of agricultural landscapes. But we have to also at the same time recognize that it's due to the fact that society actually asked farmers and the agricultural sector to organize a particular way after World War II, and the farming sector has organized very efficiently to tackle this issue and to respond to the societal need expressed at the time. So my point is that I think the farming sector cannot escape a huge responsibility here. At the same time, it's logic and fair that the society as a whole does not escape its responsibility also. We are in this situation, and all actors will have to take their responsibility here. And my second point of context is when we are talking about the relationship between agriculture and biodiversity. Relationships means, well, three different things, I think. The first view we can have on the relationship between biodiversity and agriculture It's that of threatened species and habitats we need to protect, I would say, away from agricultural areas. One example, it can be wetlands, for instance, where maybe what you can expect is be sure that agriculture will not interfere with the quality and the existence of these wetlands. So this first view, it's really a view of antagonism, fundamental antagonism between human activities and biodiversity in pristine areas. And the only thing you can do here is to minimize antagonism by exclusion. Okay, this is one view. Another view, it's that biodiversity conservation has also to be done within agricultural areas. And here we are talking about cohabitation, compromises between production and conservation. If you think about, I don't know, bustards, you know, these large birds in cereal plants. Okay, the question is how you can produce and ensure the cereal yield while letting these guys the possibility to exist in the landscape. So here you will try to minimize the antagonism by adjusting maybe production system practices, etc. You see these first two views, they have in common the fact to see biodiversity as external to agriculture and agricultural production systems, the production system per se. The third view on agriculture biodiversity relationships is to recognize that biodiversity, and in particular ordinary biodiversity, what we call ordinary biodiversity and agrobiodiversity, has a key role within the agricultural production systems. That is, this view is based on the synergies that exist or can exist between biodiversity and the agricultural objectives. That is, exploiting these synergies, you can expect positive outcomes for the agricultural production and for biodiversity. And here, the challenge is completely different. It's to value and to promote these synergies while coping with trade-offs. We don't have to be naive. So keep in mind these three different views. Actually, these views, they coexist. They coexist. All are relevant and they coexist. But sometimes it's striking to see that the discourse of different actors do not recognize that we have these different views and these different perspectives and possibly different solutions according to the views you are considering. Okay, so now I will focus mostly on the last view, that is the possibility to develop a better integration of biodiversity within the agricultural production systems. And to do this, we have to be clear there are opportunities but also challenges to develop these kind of approaches, very often requiring systemic solutions. And the first challenge is to have a solid knowledge base regarding in particular the role of biodiversity for agro-ecosystem services. It's true for the management of biodiversity for services like pollination, biotic regulation, etc. And it's not only an issue of ecology or biology. We need to have the significance of this for yield, for instance, for the reduction of costs to farmers, including reduction of chemical inputs, and for tackling management bottlenecks also. Okay, but this kind of knowledge is fundamental if we want to develop agroecological approaches, nature-based solutions. Then we need also to better characterize, understand the synergies along with compromises between, for instance, multiple services. Why? Because according to the approach you will select, you will have benefits for some services and some stakeholders at the end, but it will be at the cost, at the expense of others. So you will have to be clear on this and to explicit this so that at the end it's clear that the solution you will select will benefit to some and not to others. And then I will stress a bit more other aspects that are very important and very often restrict the possibility to better integrate biodiversity in agricultural production systems. Very often, and I'm an ecologist, I should not say this, but it's true, very often it's not the understanding of the ecology, the biology, etc. of agroecosystem, the problem. Very often we have to cope with technical, economical, social factor, very important, and acting very often as restricting the possible solutions. What we are talking about, for production system better integrating biodiversity, very often you need more work time in the field. For farmer, it's not natural. It's another way to work. You need higher technicity. Very often people think it can be easier, or you will have to drop the high technicity developed by the farming sector. It's not true at all. It's the reverse. You need even higher technicity when you work with nature. And for this, you need further innovation in terms of varieties, machinery, etc. You need to maintain income on the medium and long term. So we are not talking about transition, and after 2 or 3 years, you don't have anymore the possibility to maintain your income. You need access to a market, and you need also technological and practical guidelines and support. It's very, very important. You need also to tackle social, psychological factors that can act as a drag to innovation here. And finally, when you discuss with farmers, very often they say also, okay, that's very good, but we need to assess the actual effects on benefit to make sure that what we are doing has an effect here. So just to illustrate maybe the technological aspects and all the factors that are not at all biological, ecological aspects that can restrict good solutions. I will take one example. It's the one of using cereal variety diversity within fields. That is, you do not use only one clone of wheat, for instance, in your field. You mix a range of varieties. It can be 8 dozen of varieties within your field. What is very interesting, some farmers, they are doing this, and they are very happy with this. When you discuss with scientists, they say that they have analyzed this practice, and when they look at yield, for instance, the outcome is positive. That is, you do not lose, and when there is an effect, you have a positive effect on yield. And still, this practice is not developed in the field. Why? Actually, when you discuss with the actors, they will tell you that you have 3 at least reasons for this, nothing to do with ecology or agronomy in the field. First, grain mills and cooperatives. Ability of variety mixtures. What they want is one variety only, and it's due to a range of things, to quality of grains, to the sector is not shaped to accept variety mixture. Second, technical institutes. We lack technical institutes in France, for instance, to support this kind of innovation. And third, it's law. Law very often require homogeneity of genetic resources, and we add to have the law evolving to have acceptability here for this kind of mixture. So you see that you can have good solutions to improve biodiversity in the field that will not deploy unless we tackle a range of issues which are beyond probably the responsibility of farmers. And finally, I want to stress that we also have to account for public policies and many other determinants at larger scale, because for the solutions we are talking about, very often they will go beyond the crop fields. We will have to consider a group of actors, territories, the whole sectors and markets, public policies also, but also socio-economical megatrends. Very often, good solutions can be washed out just due to these kind of megatrends at the global level. And all these aspects also are very important because good solutions will imply coherence of production systems, regional coherence, and also technical, economical, and social feasibility. And I will end by one last example to illustrate this. It's one example of nature-based solutions developed in agricultural landscape in Portugal, actually. And the example is the one of sown biodiverse permanent pastures, which are rich in legumes. And they have been used to restore degraded grasslands in Portugal. What is interesting is that farmers and scientists, they report excellent outcome in terms of production and the quality of production, including the livestock productivity, but also positive outcomes in terms of carbon sequestration, water retention, reduction of the erosion risk, etc. So we can say that there is a demonstration of the multifunctionality of this kind of innovative practice. And why has it been implemented at a relatively large scale? Only because we have demonstrated multifunctionality here? No. People, to do this, what they have made, they have co-constructed the approach with a range of actors, including farmers. Co-construction is key to generate the adhesion of actors. And this is why they have been able to attract a sufficient pool of farmers in this kind of approach. Was it enough? No, it was not enough because it was needed to develop an economic model. And to do this, people have created an innovative financial tool to cope with this situation. And they have created a specific fund, Portuguese fund for carbon, allowing a trade between farmers and decision makers to finally generate the economic model, allowing to recognize the outcomes of these new nature-based solutions managed by farmers. And was it enough? No, because you have to guarantee on the long term the sustainability of the approach. And for this, you need also to involve consumer and to modify the behavior of consumer. And so there has been an approach to develop a norm, the guaranteed sustainability norm, generating also willingness, exploiting a willingness to pay more by the consumers. So you see by this example, and it will be my conclusions, that when we are talking about revising the relationship between biodiversity and agriculture, actually there are a lot of ideas, a lot of skills, and a lot of possibilities. But too often, people try to just propose simple adjustments and measures to modify, adjust specific facets of practices in particular. Well, very often it's not the right way to do this. The very nature of agriculture-biodiversity relationships implies to tackle issues across the whole production system at territory level with multi-actor approaches, accounting for public policies and incentives, modifying law as needed, creating new financial tools as needed, revising, if possible, if needed, governance systems, accounting for social factors, etc. So it's not just measures to adjust things that will make it. And this is needed to reconcile biodiversity issues with concern for agricultural competitiveness. It's key. It's not a step backward. Again, people have to realize what we need is super high-tech approaches. Super high-tech approaches working with nature. It's much more difficult to work with nature than using a heavy load of pesticides and chemicals. And what is interesting, it has been said by a speaker before, this is important because it will renew the status of farmers and agriculture in our societies. It will renew the citizen perception. And discussing with farmers, I know that many of them, it's very important for them to find a way to go in this direction. So finally, my last word is to say that, okay, I've stressed the fact that it's a systemic approach we need here. We need renewed support from research, I'm a researcher, but we need renewed support from technical institutes. Realize that after Second World War, to tackle the issue and to respond to the society needs, the farming sector has been helped, supported by a range of technical institutes excellently. But we have the same challenge ahead. So I think we have to think about the renewal of technical institutes so that they can tackle this kind of new challenge. It's very important. So my last sentence, it's just to say that in this talk, I try to stress the systemic view we need to take here. And knowing this, we see that there is a responsibility of farmers, of course. It's very important. But responsibility actually of many actors across the whole sector, agricultural sector, policymakers, and society at large. So I think it's needed to have dialogues between all these actors, and I hope that this kind of dialogue can be renewed and promoted for the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Xavier. Because of time restraints, I'm going to limit the questions up to one. You mentioned in the beginning of your talk that, yes, agriculture does have a negative impact on biodiversity, but you also mentioned that, next to that, a number of problems, you also mentioned that there are solutions. If you would have to make a choice, a prioritization of where to start to scale up to a farm solution for biodiversity, what would be the first issue you would tackle?
So it's not an easy question, but maybe my answer would be that we should maybe think about restriction in terms of law and financial tools sometimes that is you exploit. My answer would be, okay, we can exploit already all the solutions that are here on the table but cannot be implemented due to governance issues, structural issues, financial issues, and law. So begin by this, and you can do a lot already. Just allow the solution on the table to be deployed. And this is not due to inability to do this in the field, but just to other constraints in terms of law, finances, governance, etc.
Okay, thank you very much, Xavier, for this very interesting talk and to give us some very interesting insights, which we will certainly make use of during the discussions we have further on this morning. That makes that we are moving to our second session on how the EU can contribute to support the global biodiversity goals. and I'm going to get the support of Duarte Mira. He's the head of office for CAP in Brussels. And in the meantime, I would like to ask you here in the room, if you have questions, don't forget to go to www.ffa.tv, where you can post your questions. And at home, don't forget, in the interactive box below me, you can put your questions. We will come back to your questions at the end of this session. Duarte, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. Good morning to all. It's a pleasure to have people in room again after almost 1 year and a half. I'm Portuguese. I'm speaking in English. Bom dia a todos. I have to speak in English because to moderate the panel, it's easier. And we have now a very high-level panel with our Ministry of Agriculture. We will give us a speech, and then we'll have the pleasure to have the two former commissioners, the Commissioner for Environment, former Commissioner for Environment, Janez Potočnik, and the former Commissioner for Agriculture, Franz Fischler. Right now, let's hear the speech of the Minister. The Minister can't be here right now because it's in the trialogues in Brussels. So let's give the floor to the Minister.
Quero começar por agradecer o convite para falar dentro deste painel com convidados distintos sobre uma matéria tão relevante para a proteção da biodiversidade. A União Europeia assumiu o compromisso de atingirmos a neutralidade carbónica até 2050. Neste sentido, há uma grande ambição de responder aos desafios da transição climática, conforme está bem claro no Pacto Ecológico Europeu. As orientações e os objetivos traçados na estratégia do Prado ao Prato e na estratégia da biodiversidade da União Europeia para 2030 são oportunidades que não queremos desperdiçar. Oportunidades que nos vão permitir conciliar os ganhos de eficiência económica com a proteção da natureza e da biodiversidade. E a PAC tem vindo, ao longo dos anos e das sucessivas reformas que tem sido sujeita, a aprofundar a integração destes objetivos ambientais a par daqueles que dizem respeito ao abastecimento alimentar e ao rendimento dos agricultores, onde a proteção da biodiversidade tem um papel importantíssimo. A PAC 2030 terá uma ambição climática que será atingida não só através da chamada condicionalidade, mas também através da concessão de pagamentos plurianuais que compensem os compromissos ambientais, tanto ao nível do desenvolvimento rural, como através dos regimes ecológicos no âmbito dos pagamentos diretos de caráter anual e de adesão voluntária por parte dos agricultores. Muitas espécies e habitats estão dependentes de regimes que existem apenas no contexto da atividade agrícola e existe o risco de alguns destes elementos desaparecerem em caso de forte extensificação ou mesmo de abandono da agricultura. E a prova são as estimativas que indiciam que 20% das espécies de aves em declínio na Europa são afetadas pelo abandono dos sistemas agrários extensivos. Não podemos esquecer, o desaparecimento desta atividade fundamental para a existência humana, para além do agravamento da desertificação, aumenta o risco de incêndios e de propagação de pragas e de doenças. E é por isso necessário promover formas de gestão ativa assentes em práticas sustentáveis que permitam não só a produção de alimentos, mas também de outros bens públicos em articulação com as restantes áreas da economia e com as comunidades locais. Contribuir para a proteção da biodiversidade, melhorar os serviços ligados aos ecossistemas e preservar os habitats e as paisagens é uma das prioridades da política agrícola comum. Aliás, os instrumentos de política pública, nomeadamente estes da política agrícola comum, deverão centrar a sua atuação nos objetivos tripartidos de promover a melhoria da sustentabilidade económica, social e ambiental do setor, permitindo assegurar a resiliência e a vitalidade das zonas rurais com base no conhecimento, mas também em processos de inovação. A proteção da biodiversidade, nas suas múltiplas dimensões, é determinante para garantir a sustentabilidade sustentabilidade ambiental das atividades agrícolas e crucial para a atratividade das zonas rurais. Este é o caminho que queremos traçar, convictos de que a riqueza natural é um património de todos. E é também um dever de todos proteger a biodiversidade enquanto garantia da sustentabilidade e do futuro do nosso planeta. E quero que contem com a agricultura nesta luta pela proteção deste património que é de todos nós e que queremos que seja um legado para as próximas gerações.
Now it's time to get started with session 2, how the EU can contribute to support the global biodiversity goals. It's important if you want to make questions in the platform, go and make the questions. We are here for that. Mr. Fischler, it's a great pleasure to have you in Portugal, even virtually, but you as former Commissioner of Agriculture and one of the most mediatic commissioners that we had with as Agriculture Commissioner. Can I ask you if we are on the right way in the biodiversity strategy in the European Union?
That's a more rhetoric question, but first of all, greetings from Vienna, and thank you for inviting me to this very interesting discussion. I mean, what we are going to discuss here in this panel is how the EU can contribute to support global diversity. And here, I must say, I would like to follow up very closely what the Minister said some minutes ago, and this is that we should first bring our own house in order. I think it is very important that we are not starting now to teach the world and to say what is good for the world. We must start at home. And here I see several areas where I think that we must be innovative, but also very consequent in introducing new measures to make sure that we have in the future a biodiversified agricultural landscapes. And as I see it, I think we should primarily turn the big screws and not deal with the nitty-gritties, what we have done in the past very often. And what are these big screws? I would say, first of all, in Europe, because we are living in a moderate climate zone, it is the question of animal density on the farmland. This includes the whole manure management and the risk that we reduce biodiversity on our meadows and on our pastures when we intensify too much the cattle breeding or other animal productions. And in addition, an intensification and more manure per hectare means also a reduction in diversity of our grassland. And in addition to that, if then, because of the intensification, farmers start earlier to cut the grass and do this more often per year, then this means an enormous reduction of diversity. And the consequence of that is much less insect biomass on the agricultural land, and the next consequence, much less birds, much less other animals in our farmland. So the intensification of animal production is one of the key factors. Another key factor is that we must transform where we have such things like agricultural steppes. This is more problematic on the other part of the Atlantic, not so much here in Europe, but we have also in Europe regions and areas where we have a lot of monoculture, maize production and so on. The third element in my view is that we need more diversity and more ecological elements in our landscapes. So with the modernization of the crop production methods, we reduce the number and also the size of these ecological elements, and here a change is absolutely necessary. What is a bit or was a bit neglected until now is another key factor, but in my view a very important one, and this is the soil management. We need a better soil management because this is a base for biodiversity. And finally, I think the protection of certain habitats is something which we should continue to improve. In this respect, a lot has already been done, but more of that things are necessary. And here is then the global aspect, because the world is really looking at Europe, what we are doing in terms of how to improve biodiversity. And everybody, or many, let's say at least many countries in the world are expecting from Europe initiatives. Initiatives at home, as I described it shortly before, but also initiatives at the international stage. And when I speak about the international stage, then I mean, first of all, initiatives to negotiate better and more ambitious international standards for biodiversity. And the second element, I think, is in the trade sector and also therefore in the WTO. I think we would be very, very well advised if we start initiatives to include more biodiversity aspects into the international trade rules, and to make sure that certain practices are also punished. For example, that in Brazil or in Indonesia or in Malaysia, that year for year, hundreds, thousands, millions of hectares are burned down and transformed into agricultural land. Here, I think it is there is no other alternative than to introduce certain rules which have to be internationally respected. And only then we can make sure that these practices would change. In this field, there's also then the question of unsustainable forest practices, which is in the developing countries a huge problem, but partly also in our areas, especially when we take into account the consequences of climate change, and in this context also the vulnerability of our forests against the warming up of the climate. And finally, this is my last point I would like to make, and this is that we should also start international initiatives to protect the the most important natural habitats which remain on our globe and which shouldn't be further reduced. I think if we would be able to make such a package, and if we are prepared to seriously negotiate such packages at the international stage, then we would make real progress, and at the same time can be sure that we are not affected by unsustainable farming practices which are used in other parts of the world and which makes our lives more difficult because of the competition situation, and therefore this is also one of the most important points we should deal with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fischler. Right now, I want to give the floor to Mr. Herbert Dorfmann. It's a member of the European Parliament. Hello, Mr. Dorfmann. He is very involved. Thank you very much for spend some time with us here, because we know you have a very important role on the ongoing CAP negotiations. And before the question of the biodiversity, if I can you give us more or less the state of play of the ongoing negotiations, please, if we can?
Hello and good morning to everybody. It's really a pleasure to be with you this morning. Well, that is not that easy. We have been with your minister more or less all night. We are trying to make progress, and I'm very much convinced we need to close now the three files in the common agricultural policy. It's 3 years we are working on it, and it's really time to close. The presidency, your minister, is working hard. We are trying to find a compromise. I think this, or I'm sure, quite sure that we will find a compromise in these days. It will be a common agricultural policy which will be for sure greener as it is now. We will invest an important part, will be somewhere between 25 and 30% of the first pillar on sustainability. We will invest at least 1/3 of the second pillar in sustainability. So who is saying or talking around that we are greenwashing the common agriculture policy? I think this is simply not true. And the Parliament is very much committed on this, on a greener common agriculture policy. I need to say we have resistance in the Council on this. The member states are much more, let's say, much less ambitious on this topic as the Parliament. But I hope we will find a solution. This will be also, I hope, a common agricultural policy which will be fair. We need to have better internal convergence of the payments, a better external convergence of the payments, and we will have a redistribution of at least 10% of the payments from the bigger farms to the smaller farm. And this common agricultural policy, and I think also this is important, will be for the first time also a social common agricultural policy. For the first time, we'll introduce a social dimension in this policy, and this is 100% the work of the European Parliament. We are trying to convince the member states that we need also a social part in this policy, because I remain convinced that this brings us also to the topic of today, the sustainability of a farm and the sustainability of a sector. Yes, it's an ecological sustainability, and we need ecological sustainability, but we need a combination between ecologic, economic, and social sustainability if we want to have a long-term successful agriculture in Europe.
Thank you very much. Very good news. Then we know in firsthand that for today or tomorrow, we'll have a new CAP, and that's good. That's good for the farmers. That's good for the European farmers. And Mr. Dorfman, can I ask you what measures and what kind of measures we have in the new CAP to increase biodiversity in Europe?
Yeah, I remain convinced, and this is also what your minister said before. We are speaking a lot in these days and also this morning about the negative impact of agriculture on biodiversity, and these negative impacts for sure exist. And we need to do the utmost, and I very much agree on what Franz Fischler said before. We need to do the utmost to have an improvement on these negative impacts. But we need to see also that there is a positive impact of agriculture on biodiversity. A lot of habitats in Europe, which are a source of biodiversity, are agriculture habitats. And we need also a common agriculture policy which supports this positive impact. So we need to work on both sides. We need on one side to stop or to break down the negative impact, and we need on the other side to improve all habitats where we can have a positive impact on biodiversity. And I personally think if this common agriculture policy will be approved in these hours, and the member states are doing the proper job afterwards, because this is extremely important. This common agriculture policy will be much more in the hands of the member states as it was before. The member states need to do their strategic plans, and the member states need to define in the strategic plans how they are going to design the new eco schemes and how they are going to spend the money. And I think we have 2 or 3 important elements. The first is the conditionality for the basic payment in the first pillar. And fundamentally, we are bringing the greening elements which we had in the last years as a conditionality elements for the basic payment, and we are bringing elements of the biodiversity strategy as a conditionality in the first pillar. And in this, we are heavily debating also with the member states, with the council, on the percentage. Then we have the new eco schemes. And the new eco schemes are a real opportunity, because the new eco schemes will be something between 25 and 30% of the first pillar. So it will be something like from 10 to 15 billion euros a year in the European Union. And this is an important amount of money. And if we use this amount of money properly, if the member states design in their strategic plans eco schemes which can support and which supports biodiversity, there can be we can do an important step forward. And I very much agree with what Franz said before. For example, the stocking density is maybe one of the most important things. We cannot allow anymore that we have in Europe a situation where more and more we have a meat and a milk production which is fundamentally close to the big harbors in Europe, where the soya from South America comes in. Then we have something which is for me more an industry than something else. And there the soya is transformed in pig meat and in milk. And this is then exported to China. This is not the model for the European agriculture. And we cannot support these things. And I think we need to use these eco schemes to get rid of these systems and to support the farmers who have another model of agriculture. And with this, I don't say that we need to go to extreme extensification of agriculture. We need also intensive agriculture. But I think we need this, and we are speaking less than before, but we spoke years ago a lot about sustainable intensification. And this project to say we need to produce on one side food, because this is important for Europe. We need food in Europe, and we have a responsibility to feed our population, but to feed also the world. But on the other side, we need to produce in a sustainable way. And who is going to do the eco schemes needs to have this in mind. And then we have the second pillar, and this sometimes we forget. We have very, very important tools in the second pillar. And the agro-environmental schemes in the second pillar are nothing new. They are 30 years old. And I see member states and regions, if I think Franz Wischler spoke before, if I look at Austria, which is very close to the place I live, or my own region, the middle of the mountains, but also a lot of regions in the Mediterranean area, in Portugal and in other parts, how important are the agro-environmental schemes if they are properly used? And we are in the European Union in a situation where some member states, Austria for example, some others, use a big amount of the second pillar for agro-environmental schemes, and they are very successful with this, because they are able to maintain very, very important habitats for biodiversity, paying with these agro-environmental schemes in the second pillar. And in the meantime, other member states are close to zero. And this is not acceptable anymore. Therefore, there will be a ring fencing in the new common agricultural policy for sustainability in the second pillar, because it is not acceptable anymore that we have member states who, after 30 years, say that they cannot offer agro-environmental schemes to the farmers because the farmers do not accept them. So I'm asking myself why the farmers, for example, I'm here in Brussels, why the farmers in Belgium accept them and the farmers in the Netherlands do not. Is the agriculture in Belgium and the Netherlands, is it so different? Or is there some other problem? Is there a problem in the implementation of the policy itself? So we need to address these questions if we want to go on. And I want to conclude, I think we have to find new solutions. And I like very much what Franz said before, for example, on organic matter in the soil. Agriculture has an enormous potential to absorb CO2. And on that is a bit the same problem as biodiversity. We know that we are emitters, we emit CO2, but agriculture is also a sector which can absorb. And I think we need to come to a system where transport, industry, whoever emits, needs to find possibilities to absorb, and there needs to be a money transfer. So to be clear, this cannot be solved within the common agriculture policy. We need to come to a new emission trading system where the emitters pay and who absorbs gets. And this is a big opportunity for agriculture, because if we come to a system where farmers who have proper methods to agriculture methods to absorb on a long term on organic matter in the soil or with organic matter in the soil, or with forestry, for example, and get money from other sectors which emits, this could be a new step in a cooperation between agriculture and other sectors of the economy. And I think we have to, in the next years, we have to look a bit beyond beyond the common agriculture policy. We know if we want to achieve not only a better biodiversity goals, or we want to achieve the biodiversity goals, but we want to achieve also the climate goals, which means that this parliament here decided that we want to have reduction of 55% of emission in the next 9 years, and we want to become climate neutral till 2050. Without agriculture, this will not happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dorfman. I will give the floor right now to Mr. Janez Potočnik, former Commissioner for Environment and President of FA. Hello, Mr. Potočnik. I will make you the same question. Are we in the right track in Europe in order to increase biodiversity?
Thank you, Duarte, and good day to everybody. It is great to be in such a good company. I absolutely agree with Franz that if we want to be credible, we have to put first our house in order. But for the beginning, I will speak more about principles and aspects which are not so much European Union specific, just to put the things in the context and where the solutions we should search for lie. To start, biodiversity is life, and our life included. And for many species, unfortunately, it's already too late. So we must act immediately and decisively. According to the Living Planet Index, we have witnessed 60% of the fall in recent 40 years. And according to IPBES, biomass of mammals living in the nature has been reduced in recent decades for 82%. Based on scientific findings of UNEP International Resource Panel, which I'm co-chairing with Isabella Teixeira. She was former Minister for Environment from Brazil. 80% of global 80% of global land-related biodiversity loss is caused by resource extraction and processing of biomass. This was revealed in Global Resource Outlook a few years ago in 2019. The economic sector's biomass management is most closely connected to, of course, agriculture and forestry, which is pointing where our attention should go, which was clearly explained also by Xavier. With Isabella, we were actively engaged in reaching an agreement at Nagoya CBD 2010 COP, which was considered as a major global breakthrough in biodiversity protection. In Nagoya in 2010, we have, among others, adopted so-called, you will remember, Aichi targets. 20 goals we have committed to as a global community. The embarrassing fact is that after more than a decade, none of them have been in reality met. Also, this is the reason that as co-chairs of the International Resource Panel, we decided to contribute a think piece titled Building Biodiversity, the Natural Resource Management Approach. We want to share our experiences and also propose some workable solutions and thus contribute to the success of this year's COP15 in Kunming. One missed opportunity, even if based on good intentions which we have had, was certainly enough. What are our messages? In the first place, it is essential to address the drivers of biodiversity loss. Using the natural resource optics helps understanding how the drivers are connected to the consequences, because natural resources are kind of a bridge between economy and competitiveness on one hand, and climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and health implications on the other. We are proposing 4 major recommendations to policymakers. First, know your true impact. Every sector and every consumer must understand why and how they have an impact on nature, where the materials come from, and how each step in product's life cycle affects biodiversity. Producing, using, reusing, and finally disposing products in resource-efficient and circular ways can have a net positive effect on biodiversity. A science-based, participatory value chain approach based on material flow and impact footprint data provides transparency on biodiversity use and impacts across sectors and lifestyles. This transparency can be used to design policies that incentivize demand for resource-efficient and low-footprint products. Second, plan together. Policymakers in different areas must engage with stakeholders and consult with scientists to map the overlapping uses of natural resources in the ocean and on the land. It is the combination of local and scientific knowledge that will allow business as usual to be replaced with the innovative, integrated policies that essentially simultaneously meet biodiversity, climate, socioeconomic, and infrastructure requirements. Integrated spatial landscape planning assesses natural resource demand across ministries, sectors, and stakeholders, and with high-level political support optimizes integrated policymaking for biodiversity governance. Third, grow with nature. We need to design economic, urban, agricultural, and other policies to incentivize nature-based solutions and transitioning to a circular bioeconomy that leverages natural ecosystem services while halting and reversing the biodiversity loss. And finally, value nature. To value nature, it's not to detract from its intrinsic worth. We should recognize and account for the role nature plays in our world and enable the economic system to recognize nature's benefits to allow investments, for example, payments for ecosystem services. Governance of natural capital valuation requires clear international standards and careful regulation. So we should actually stop giving producers the signals that destroying natural capital is free of charge. And we should stop confusing the consumers by asking them to behave responsibly, by requesting them to pay more if they do so. I would be actually the first claiming that nature has intrinsic value we have to respect and protect, and also that pricing is quite a perverse way of doing that. But until, as nicely put it by Professor Stiglitz, invisible hand will often be invisible, since it is often not there. This is a kind of a direction leading to a collective suicide by these invisible hands of markets. The recent Dasgupta review addressing the economics of biodiversity is certainly also worth of our attention. It is pointing to the fact that three key pervasive features of nature, mobility, silence, and invisibility, are making it difficult to comprehensively record our use and impacts associated with nature. A report is suggesting the following conclusions. We need to think of nature as an asset and recognize that our economies and well-being fundamentally rely on it. This also means realizing that we are all asset managers and that we are currently seriously mismanaging our assets at the global level. The second conclusion is, for me, the most important. Our unsustainable engagement with nature can be traced to institutional failure and to the failure of contemporary economics to acknowledge that we are embedded with nature and not external to it. So we have to answer a simple question. Are we humans part of nature or not? And this has certain consequences, of course. Then to engage sustainability with nature, we need to change how we think, act, and measure the success. No one actor is solely responsible for change. Governments, institutions, business, individuals all have a role to play. And finally, there are three broad and interconnected transitions we need to pursue. We need to invest in nature's supply and address our demand overshoot on nature. We need to move towards a measure of inclusive wealth as the appropriate main measure of sustainable economic prosperity. And we need to transform our institutions to allow this change to happen and ensure economic and finance decision-making reflects nature. Let it be enough of science and scientific recommendations for the beginning, with acknowledgement that probably the major lesson to learn from the current COVID crisis, we are still locked in. It's exactly that policy making in the future should be more science-based. Also, when it comes to biodiversity protection. Thank you for now, and back to you, Duarte.
Thank you, Yanis. Thank you very much. Right now, if you agree, I will choose one question for each speaker. And the first question I have here is to Mr. Franz Fischler from Peter Saint. Should we consider a model where we have biodiversity-rich areas and more intensely produced areas separately, or a model then has biodiversity considerations in the productive areas? Peter Saint from Consulate.
Eduardo. Oh, okay, thank you. Mr. Fischler, I'm going to interrupt you because we do not hear you here in Portugal. We will ask our technical staff to have a look into this.
Sorry, there was...
this is much better.
My mic was blocked. So what I said is, I'm really very grateful for this question, because this question shows at the same time the difference between the challenges we have in Europe and the way how on the other side of the Atlantic the production systems work. I think we in Europe cannot do the same what the Americans are doing by separating intensive agricultural land from natural parks or other natural habitats. Our challenge is that we must be able to organize biodiversity and agricultural production on the same field. This is the challenge we must master. And this has to do because of the availability of land. We don't have so much land than in other parts of the world. And we always had, also in the past, multifunctional practices, and we must continue with that. But let me add a few small things. First, I fully agree with Janusz. I think our problem is not so much anymore a lack of goals and objectives. We have a broad range of good objectives. The bottleneck here in Europe is the implementation and the control. And here, I think the policymakers should be very careful how they manage this future concept with the strategic plans, and how they make sure that there's equal treatment and a level playing field Europe-wide and not only in some parts of Europe. I also agree that it is urgent, so we must act immediately. We can't wait anymore. And then, this was also, in my view, a very important point Janusz made, and this is we should be even more open to innovative approaches, also in the way how we run our farms and how we organize our crop management. I think digitalization, for example, can help in this context a lot. And finally, the point was also made, the role of consumers. The consumers and the consumer interests must be much more integrated in the overall concept how we would like to achieve better biodiversity. But not in the sense, and Janusz warned here, that we are sometimes going here in the wrong direction. We must follow the approach which was described by Janusz. That's, in my view, a very important point. And therefore, I would finally only like to add, when he quoted Mr. Stiglitz and the invisible hand, then I would like to quote Pascal Lamy, and he said once, we should give the invisible hand our hand and lead the invisible hand in the right direction. Thank you.
Right now, I have another question to Janez and to Mr. Dorfman. All mentioned the importance of soil's carbon sequestration. What do you think of the new idea of carbon farming to increase carbon on soils? I will ask to Mr. Dorfman, please, to ask first, to answer first.
Well, as I said before, I consider this a big opportunity for agriculture in Europe. We have a communication of the Commission on this. We need to do a legal framework for this, but we need also to reflect how to support this. And as I said before, I think we should go out from our, let's say, normal thinking on this. We should go out from our simply thinking within the common agricultural policy, and we should to start to think how the LULUCF regulation and so the sequestration of CO2 from the agriculture sector, how this can be awarded with money which is coming from outside, from the emitters. And I think this could be the interesting new approach. But I think this could be really a win-win-win situation, because it's a win situation for the climate. We absorb CO2. It's a win situation for the farmer, because a soil with a higher degree of humus and of carbon is more productive, and it's an advantage for the agriculture activity, and it's a win situation for biodiversity, because we should not forget biodiversity. Sometimes we consider only animals and plants which we see and which are running around, and plants which we see on the ground, but we forget the higher contribution of soil to biodiversity and the high importance of flora and fauna in the soil. I think this is an extremely important contribution to biodiversity, and on this a better soil is for sure a big advantage.
Thank you very much.
I can...
Please, Janez.
Thank you. As you might recall, one of the nightmares of my mandate during when I was Commissioner for Environment was actually the Soil Framework Directive, and we need to remove it from our table during my mandate, because it was simply no readiness among European Union member states that it would be pushed ahead. So I think that it's quite serious time which is now emerging again, when we see very well the importance of the soil management. And of course, one would need to redesign the proposal which was on the table. But there were many reasons why it was not adopted. But one of the reasons was also that member states were very much claiming that that soil is local, and that their responsibility on management of the soil needs to be done on that level. But if we follow the logic which we are currently explaining, if it plays a very important role also, soil sequestration in the climate policy, and the climate policy, unfortunately, it's not local anymore, it's pretty much global and definitely European. then of course the rethinking of how to manage the soil and how to integrate it in overall policy making, maybe the time for that has arrived again.
Okay, thank you very much. Our time is over. Was a big pleasure. Have the three high-level speakers. Thank you very much, Mr. Fischler. Thank you very much, Mr. Dorfman. And thank you for your time to debate with us and explain a little bit the state of play of the CAP. And congratulations, I think, as you said, we will have new CAP tomorrow. Yanis, thank you very much once more from Portugal. Thank you. Big hand for them. So now the session is over. I just want to say that the session is recorded. If you miss something and if you want to hear again, it's just go to ffa.tv and you will have recorded. The floor is yours, Jürgen.
Thank you, Duarte, also for joining me here on the platform. So I was feeling less alone. And indeed, we have been noticed that in some parts of Europe there are streaming problems. But I would say, don't worry, we are recording this session. And if you would like to have a look at it after today's meeting, you can go to as well the FFA website as the ELO website or the CAP website. We started in our first session to discuss a number of global problems. Xavier Leroux told us a little bit about what those problems were. In the second session, we were asking ourselves the question what Europe can do to solve some of those problems. But we also have to ask ourselves the question what we can do within Europe. And let's say in the last couple of months, we have heard a lot of two very important strategies. On one side, we have the CAP, the Common Agriculture Policy. On the other side, we have the EU Biodiversity Strategy 2030. And that's exactly what we would like to do during this third session. We would like to have a look at as well the Biodiversity Strategy 2030 and the Common Agriculture Policy. And then our question is, we have two strategies, but are they serving a single goal? And to answer at least part of that question, I have the pleasure to have Humberto Delgado Rosa with us. He's Director of Natural Capital, Director General for the Environment of the European Commission. Humberto, it's a pleasure to have you here. Even if I'm visiting your home country, we still have to do it online. But anyhow, I'm glad we have you here on the screen. I will give you the floor. Please do so.
Thank you, Jürgen. Bon dia. I will address you in English, but first allow me to say uma saudação especial à Confederação.
But first, a special greeting to the Portuguese CAP. I'm very sorry not to be able to be there in Santarém with you.
On the suggested topic of the biodiversity strategy versus the common agriculture policy. The first thing I want to say, I don't need to spend much time on the state of biodiversity in the world, Europe included, because other speakers have done it better than I could do, namely the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. We do face a dramatic biodiversity decline worldwide that has brought this to one of the major global challenges together with climate change. We know very well nowadays the drivers of loss. They are identified by science and ranked. And the first one is land use change and sea use change. So, especially on agricultural land, we have faced indeed a major decline, including in Europe. And that comes, as Xavier Leroux rightly said, from intensification. So it's not an issue that agriculture destroys biodiversity. It's an issue that certain agricultural practices and trends are not compatible with biodiversity, to put things as they are. And the issue is problematic, of course, first from the loss of such. We all cherish nature and biodiversity, but we also know that damaged ecosystems are more fragile, they have less resilience, including to deal with extreme events as those brought by climate change. But, and this is an important point, it's a very serious issue from an economic point of view. because ecosystems do provide us uncountable economic benefits, including the elements for growing and producing food. Actually, it's half of global GDP that's linked to nature, and the three largest economic sectors, including agriculture, food and drink, construction, they are all highly dependent on nature. So that's why we do have a biodiversity strategy emanating from the EU Green Deal with a comprehensive set of targets and measures to put use nature on a path to recovery. Now, let me say something more here on this issue of putting our house in order. We also know that we need to get, and the UN Secretary General referred to it, we need a new global deal for nature to be reached this year in China. And we are needing to get there in a moment when we know this new global deal must really be more meaningful than the previous ones that failed. We also know that we want the EU to lead, and the EU leads by example, to lead on biodiversity as it has led in climate change. So that means why we need an ambitious biodiversity strategy for Europe as such, to set the stage of what we will do anyway in Europe, because we need, it's our advantage. Now, one point also on strategies. More than saying that there are two strategies, the biodiversity strategy and the common agriculture policy, I think it's fairer to say there are two strategies. It's the biodiversity strategy and the farm to fork strategy. They are well aligned and coherent, representing the needed pathway to a sustainable EU food system, and wider than that, to put us within planetary boundaries. And the common agriculture policy is an instrument. It's a policy that, of course, must also be coherent with both. Now, on the biodiversity strategy, which is more my remit, first thing I want to tell you, it is purely science-based. What you find in there is all as a link with what science requires. It's based on very sound scientific evidence, and actually the targets set there go to the side of the minimum needed for the recovery of our environmental degradation. So yes, it is ambitious, but it's also balanced and realistic vis-à-vis what we need to attain overall. The main point is we have learned from policy failures of the past and what needs to be different now, and there is an essential point. Yannis has referred to the Aichi targets of the current biological framework, global biological framework. The issue is the Aichi targets were not attained. The one that got closest to success was the quantified one on protected areas. So my message is we need also for biodiversity and ecosystems quantification, measurability, and that's what you find in the biodiversity strategy. Now, some words on what it means more concretely for agricultural land. First, let me tell you, and that's also expressed in the biodiversity strategy, we cannot do it without farmers. Farmers are the guardians of the land, and indeed they are the asset managers of our land. So they have a vital role in preserving biodiversity, and many of their actions actually do it. Our ecosystems are pretty much adapted to agricultural practices of a certain type, extensive ones, where the agricultural land acts as an ecosystem in itself. It's certain agricultural practices, especially the more intensive ones, that have become a key driver of biodiversity, the biodiversity decline. And actually, improving the condition and diversity of agroecosystems increases the sector's resilience as such to climate change, environmental risks, soil quality, a very important topic, etc. So what are the targets? You probably know them all, but I'll refer them briefly. The targets and actions more specifically linked to farmland in the biodiversity strategy. The first one that I'll refer, and the very important one, is to bring back something that was lost in many places in Europe and is very much needed for biodiversity and for farming, which is high diversity landscape features that we want to put back 10% in agricultural land because they were essentially destroyed to a large extent in several parts in Europe, and they have a role to fulfill. Then there's this target common with the farm to fork strategy on having a quarter of agricultural land under organic farming by 2030. This is not because organic farming is a silver bullet, but it is an agroecological practice well regulated and with demonstrable benefits for biodiversity. There's also these quantified targets to reduce the risk and use of pesticides by 50%, as well as the use of the more hazardous and dangerous pesticides. Also the target to reduce by 50% the nutrient loss, so as to combat eutrophication while ensuring there's no deterioration in soil fertility, and this target to reverse the decline of pollinating insects, which deliver a very well-known service for farmers and for agriculture, which is pollination. We think that the implementation of these actions will reduce the impacts of the agriculture sector on biodiversity. They will allow the restoration of ecosystems and their services, and very importantly, they will bring benefits for the long-term agriculture productivity in itself. So there's no question about these targets or the overall Green Deal targets endangering food security. We are the largest exporter of food in the world, and in parallel, we do aim to halve food waste in the EU as enshrined in the Farm to Fork strategy. So indeed, and this is an important message I would give, we aim to ensure the long-term sustainability of farming in Europe, and that does require nature and biodiversity as such. So farmers do have a lot to win as the transition bears many opportunities in spite of the challenges. I'll add a bit more on that. If time still allows, I would give just some highlights on the CAP. How can the CAP contribute to achieving these targets? I don't need to tell you how it is a crucial policy. Actually, the main funding instrument for biodiversity is the CAP as itself. We need to recognize that the current CAP did not succeed in contributing to alter the biodiversity loss. That's why we do need a new CAP as proposed by the Commission. And also, and this is an important point, there are indeed new societal expectations from the CAP and from agriculture, noticeably climate and biodiversity expectations, because of the dire situation we face on both angles, nature and climate. The proposal of the Commission was presented before the Green Deal, but the Commission did say that its CAP proposal had quite some potential to drive towards the Green Deal under certain conditions, which is mainly keeping or reinforcing some key aspects, of which some were already referred. I won't go in detail, but an adequate no backsliding principle so that member states increase the ambition on environment and climate, the ambitious system of conditionality, maintaining some key standards, including crop rotation, soil rotation, the eco schemes, mandatory for member states, voluntary for farmers, a ring-fence spending for the environment and climate in rural development. On top of this, we welcome the ring-fencing spending proposals from Parliament and Council. So we look with a lot of attention and interest to the ongoing super trialogue. But my main point is we cannot afford another CAP that does not deliver on environment and climate. And this is first and foremost because that would be bad for the farming community. When you have societal expectations require a certain trend, it's an advantage to deliver on that trend if a certain policy or funding instrument is to prevail in the long run. My final message is on these opportunities linked to sustainable agriculture. First, there are many examples providing that the sustainable agriculture can work and be competitive, including on agroecological approaches. And I took note of the example of Xavier Leroux on the pastures in Portugal that have also, these biodiverse pastures in Portugal that have also followed in the past. But my main point on the opportunities come from another angle, which is consumers. You know, in Europe, many people actually want to get healthy food, and they do equate healthy food to natural food, whatever that means to them. So this linking of agriculture with nature, benefiting nature or regenerative agriculture, at the same time using naturalness as a way to produce food, this sounds well for many consumers. So it's a pathway of opportunities for the future, I would claim. I know many farmers are willing to embrace the change or already embracing it. Many face difficulties to do it. That's why guidance and support is needed. And I believe a properly oriented CAP can deliver just that. Jürgen, sorry if I took too long, but this is the words I wanted to share. very pleased to stay in the debate.
Umberto, it was a pleasure to give you those extra minutes. We have some questions coming in for you. I'm going to limit those to 2 questions for the moment. First one is concerning land sharing and land pairing. We have heard throughout the sessions this morning a couple of times the importance of multifunctionality and the combination of agriculture and biodiversity measures. If we look at the EU Biodiversity Strategy 2030, including the question to get towards 10% strict protected areas, the question is whether, to the opposite of the multifunctionality, those 10% strict protected areas is not exactly the opposite, and that you make a division between nature conservation on one side and agriculture elsewhere in the country. And then if you are referring to a number of positive effects of biodiversity on agriculture, for instance, pollination, is that still going to work if we divide those two so strictly?
Yes, it will work. Actually, there's no contradiction whatsoever. I don't favor whatsoever a segregation versus integration approach. We need integration everywhere, but there's room for everything. Even today, we already have it. You know, the good example of Natura 2000, the largest network of protected areas in the world, which is in the EU. Well, you already have strict protection there. Where certain habitats, certain species do require it. So this 10% strict protection derives from science, is on the minimal side of what is being told by science on some ecosystems and habitats needing to be left alone. But still there, I'll tell you, imagine we would aim to protect a certain ecosystem, to live in nature essentially undisturbed, but for that you would need human interference, be it to eradicate invasive species or to keep certain low-intensity practices that are required to maintain natural processes. So there's actually no contradiction. What we aim is to, agriculture is compatible with nature protection in protected areas. We have a lot of those good practices of agriculture in protected areas, in several cases actually needed to maintain biodiversity. So I just say multifunctionality for sure. The cursor can be on several grounds or more human interference, less human interference, and all that goes under the same approach of compatibility, namely in Europe.
And then I have the impression that we have some organic farmers within the audience over here. As one of the questions is, well, if we want to increase organic farming up to a level of 25%, today those people are getting a premium on the market price because they are delivering organic farming products. But if you bring that up to 25, what is going to happen with that premium? Are we not coming into a situation where today those people are rewarded because of a higher market price, while tomorrow that may be because of a subsidized system that we are just going to lose that premium market price for organic food?
Well, you can imagine I'm not an agricultural economy expert whatsoever, but I do think it's easy to conceive a balance while through research and development, we also find ways to increase the productivity of organic farming as such, to solve some of the problems it still has when some components are lacking. At the same time, I see no evidence of any reduction of consumers aiming at organic food. So the demand does not seem to be diminishing. So I don't think that through going to 25%, not 100%, organic farming in the EU, we are risking the sector, or rather on the contrary.
Okay, thank you very much. Time now to introduce you to our next panel. We will discuss exactly the different strategies and how they can contribute to the biodiversity goals. We have 4 panelists. 3 of them will join us online. That is Arnaud Dalissac. He's a board member of FNSEA. We have Geraldine Kutas, who is Director General of CropLife. And we have Luc Bas, Director of IUCN, European's regional office in Brussels. And here on stage, we will have Mark Titterington, Senior Advisor strategy and partnerships for the Forum for the Future of Agriculture and also for the AgriLife project. Mark, I would say, come and join me on stage so don't feel alone over here. Welcome. And I will first give the floor to our friends who are online. And the first one I would like to give the floor, but I would like to ask all of you to limit your first the introduction and your first views on the different strategies. Let's say up to 3, max 5 minutes. Arnaud, you're the first one. I give the floor.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. I'm very glad to be with you, and sorry it was not possible for me to join Santarem and to be with you. As farmer, we are aware, and when I have heard the Commissioner Fischler, I remember that we have developed with him the concept of multifunctionality, and farming try to implement more and more this concept of multifunctionality. This last 20 years, a lot of things have changed. Now we take care of the river. We don't cultivate anymore 5 meters along the river. We keep the edges. It's one of the examples of the greening after 2014. We keep the pastures. It's very important for the biodiversity. And it's some important change who have been done in the past and that I want to underline. And really, we need to be aware that we have also made part of the past to the needs of the society. Secondly, about the actual situation and how the CAP is in phases with the needs of biodiversity. I want to underline that if the eco scheme are voluntary for the farmer, most of the farmer need to have this 20% or 30% of support, and nobody want to lose that. And I am sure that they will try to reach these new challenges for the farmer. And in my country, in France, we have developed 3 entrances for reaching this eco scheme. First, it's to be labeling inorganic or labeling it high value, environmental value. It's something new. It's reasoning agriculture. It was the name in the past. So we have another possibility. It's the diversity of the rotation. More you have crops, more you are sure to reach this eco scheme. And the third possibility is around the 10% of non-productive or unproductive area. It's also a way to reach this eco scheme, and around that we have to define more clearly what it means for the farmer. But for example, around edges, sometimes it's 10 meters, 15 meters of less productive area. That's why if you have just 1 hectare of edges, maybe it represents maybe 10 hectares of unproductive area, and we expect that will be recognized like that by the Commission and by the French services in the first time. It's some example of solutions that I want to underline, because it's important that the CAP will be a possible solution and not impossible. Really, I represent the farmer. I want to implement the best things on the farm to be sustainable, to transmit my farm to my children in the future. And really, I want to have something sustainable and something possible for the farmer. It's my only point for starting.
Thank you very much, Arnaud. We will now switch to Geraldine Coutas. She's Director General for CropLife Europe. Geraldine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the very kind invitation. I will speak in English, but Me deixem cumprimentar a Confederação dos Agricultores de Portugal.
Let me say something in Portuguese. Greet everybody and Cap, and thank you very much for your invitation. It's a pity I'm not able to be there with you, but I am here online.
What we strongly believe at CropLife Europe, we really think that innovation is a key part of the solution to tackling the decline in biodiversity. We are all aware about the link between agricultural production and biodiversity, and we really believe that innovation will be the key to tackle the decline. The European Parliament is currently finalizing its draft report on the 2030 Biodiversity Strategy, and in fact we are encouraged that MEPs recognize the need to enable technologies, including biopesticides, plant biotechnology and precision application tools. We really believe that this is key to support farmers in further optimizing their use of resources in the context of integrated pest management. I've heard what Umberto said about the scientific basis of the biodiversity strategy and the fact that food security would not be endangered by the target. But nonetheless, I mean, CropLife Europe has long called for a comprehensive impact assessment on the targets included in the strategy. And we will continue to bang this drum given how important we believe this to be. We understand the political willingness to send a clear signal that we don't have a minute to lose when it comes to biodiversity preservation. But food is an essential sector, and we can't gamble with food security. Therefore, we think that we need to consider the individual, but also the cumulative effect of these measures. We need to build the right legislative framework for the years to come, and surely the best way to do this is on the solid foundations of more data and understanding. And to do so, all stakeholders should be involved and heard. We also believe that it is crucial for each member state to set, measure, and implement their own targets. As European agriculture has a broad range of climatic conditions, types of agricultural production, and very different agronomic challenges. We need local solutions, not one-size-fits-all solutions. Biodiversity will be delivered at the local farm level, according to local farm and biodiversity needs. And we need to be flexible enough, and the framework has to be flexible enough to make sure this can happen. So with this in mind, to protect and enhance biodiversity and the agricultural environment, we need to identify where improvements can feasibly be made across all types of farming models. We support the aim to increase organic production driven by growing consumer demand, but it is important to note the ecological trade-offs involved. For instance, lower yield inputs. Playing our part. As an industry, we really want to foster solutions, and we are striving to play our part. With the deployment of digital solutions, for instance, such as targeted application, we can minimize the usage and risk of pesticide being used. And this is really in line with the biodiversity strategy. A recent scientific foresight study published by the European Parliament underlines that thanks to precision agricultural techniques applied in integrated pest management, we can see a reduction in pesticide use of up to 20 to 30% and a reduction of sprayed area between 50 and 80%. Through our stewardship training, we share best practices with farmers, so pesticide leakage into water and soil are minimized. Several studies confirm that point source pesticide losses from farmyard drains and sewage plant outlets commonly contribute more than 50% of pesticide pollution in surface water. We know that water contamination from point sources could be 100% avoided, so addressing these offers the possibility of quick wins for water protection. So there are just a few examples that I would like to provide. We all have part of the solutions. Let's join forces and collaborate to reach our common objective, which is feed a growing population while preserving biodiversity.
Thank you very much. For our third panelist, Luc Bas, we go to Brussels. Luc is director of the AICN European Regional Office in Brussels. Luc, tell us, what is your viewpoint?
Obrigado a todo, and thank you, Jürgen and ELO, for the invitation. And of course, we are always very happy to be in the dialogue on what we have to achieve together. That's clear. And for us, the farmers and the landowners are obviously key because they are the custodians of a huge amount of the land, a big majority of the land in Europe. So we need to do this together, and ICN has this in its DNA, also through its membership, that for some may not be as familiar, but we have state members, obviously NGO members, but in those non-governmental organizations, we have quite a few users, and also the forest owners and others that are members. And sustainable use is at the core of ICN's work, together with work on protection and species. So it is an and story and not an or story for ICN. So much has been said already. I think one of the things that triggered me was a question even, whether this biodiversity strategy and the CAP are serving a single goal. There should be no question mark when everything is pointed at the Green Deal and what the Green Deal wants to achieve. And that Green Deal wants a socially viable, economically viable, but clearly a greener and a more nature-oriented work and funding as well. So that common agriculture policy needs to be in line, has to become way much greener and fundamentally greener, and putting nature at the heart of what it does. We do see the challenge for landowners and farmers, and we are going to put all our weight against making sure that the processes are practical, that there is a good remuneration for it, and honestly, the public is expecting it. The farmers and landowners and forest owners are not just producing food or timber, or they're not just producers, they are these custodians, and they provide these incredible important ecosystem services, which will need to be rewarded. And there are these eco schemes, and I won't go into detail, and we want them to be as efficient as possible, and with the 30% ring fencing and so on and so forth. Even the current cap could already serve the purpose of the Green Deal much more intensively and much better. But ultimately, we would like to see a big shift in the direction here, and to make sure that what happens at the national level is also very clearly monitored. An element we see in this whole ecosystem services debate is that there is a big discussion about one-off payments, and then for landowners to leave the land as it is, and also farmers to look at production in a different way. It is clear that we need an understanding and a level playing field on the accounting of natural capital, and what the services are it delivers, or when you destroy it, what the price is to be really paid. And we don't have that yet. Such a system seems to be far-fetched, but it's already happening at the international level. European Commission is investing in it, Eurostat is doing this, and I think it's going to be a cornerstone that is needed. Another point is the repeated production need and increase of production needs that many throw up as a challenge here. Let's first look at what we produce and what is already being wasted. Maybe if we can tackle that enormous amount of waste, maybe the more production is not needed. And of course, do we need to be such a huge exporter of food to the rest of the world? Wouldn't it be better to have the local conditions in those countries where we export to be improved? And why do we need to be the biggest exporter? So those are questions one can ask. And of course, business models need to be looked at. Market conditions are not easy for farmers. Right price to the farmer is incredibly important. And then again, we need to do this all in a social justice context. We are supportive of that, and we understand the challenges, but we do need to shift away from a agriculture that is dominantly still very much destroying the basis on what it depends. The agriculture is dependent on the services. Just one number to throw in the air. The report that was produced lately was a 577 billion of loss in crops because of the pollinators disappearing. This is a huge macroeconomic number, and I'm sure it's transferable to the local level. So if we continue to undermine the pollinators, then we won't even talk about agriculture anymore. So I wanted to just emphasize those, and then maybe as a final point, another interesting point that triggered our attention was the strict protection issue and how that seems to be in this accordance with the Green Deal and with what landowners are expecting, I think I'm trying to quote very quickly what was written, but there was this undermining of the targets because of the strict protection ambition. We need all of this. We need multifunctionality, we need restoration of nature, but there is the very little nature that is left in Europe that needs to be strictly protected. And strict protection does not mean full non-intervention. But yes, we need to be agreeing on what it means. IUCN has these categories that describe it. Hopefully this will be used as a basis, so we're not improvising on this too much. And yes, for those parts that may become in non-intervention, for those landowners that own those lands, they will need to be properly rewarded for leaving the land in some cases to develop naturally. I'll stop here, Jürgen.
Okay, thank you very much, Luc. And here on stage we have Mark Titterington, who's more or less the voice for the FFA today. Mark, can I have your views, please?
Jürgen, and good to be back here in a slightly different capacity this morning. Good morning to everyone. See some friendly faces on the panel with me as well. I mean, we're talking about nature, biodiversity, and agriculture, and what we in the community can do to support the implementation of the strategy. And so, you know, it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to talk about an exciting initiative that we're developing at ELO called AgriLife. My colleague Thierry de la Sky commented on that yesterday. I mean, for those of you that know ELO, you'll know that infused in our DNA is this pragmatic approach to finding solutions that combine environmental protection and economic benefits, and we're absolutely committed to that. And I think what I'd say about the biodiversity strategy and regulatory framework that comes after that requires farmers and land managers to take steps in the right direction. That's right. It's necessary, but arguably not sufficient. And that's why we think that needs to be balanced with an approach that recognizes, values, and disseminates best practices and lessons from the ground, which can also then subsequently inform the policy-making process. And we would argue that that is the best way, actually, to empower farmers and land managers to take some of the actions that they need to and move us to an experienced and results-driven approach. So, you know, what is AgriLife? Well, we want it to become a process, a robust, credible process that reinforces the brand equity, if you like, of a label. It's an ELO initiative. It's precisely at the crossroads of what we're talking about here this morning in terms of the Green Deal and Biodiversity Strategy. And I think it can play a role in guiding and complementing the next CAP and shape the food and agriculture system in Europe as we move forward. You know, we say again, for the avoidance of doubt, we fully support the intent of the strategy and the actions that are being taken, but by making it practical, we perhaps move away from some of the theoretical and potentially just quantitative focus on quantitative targets and go for a more pragmatic bottom-up approach. And it's in that context that we're trying to intervene in this way. So we want AgriLife to become a high-quality efforts and results-based approach from farmers, creating a recognized, sustainable network able to mobilize some of the operating forces to meet this challenge of improving agrobiodiversity on European farms. And I think in some ways we're anticipating the movement towards regenerative agriculture, aiming at influencing innovative practices, technologies, by ensuring the economic and social viability of agriculture businesses. And it should be, if we're successful, an exemplary stimulus, if you like, to extend the proven use of good practices and the accelerated implementation of some of the things that we know are in the new CAP, particularly around the sensitive interplay between biodiversity and the environment. So we're making good progress in getting this set up. There's a scientific committee that's going to be in charge of defining a methodology that will evaluate the agri-biodiversity conditions of farmlands. That will be made up, as you'd imagine, of the right specialists. That there's going to be a steering committee that will have oversight in terms of strategy, quality assurance, and dissemination of the things that we include in it. The Commission, through JRC, is going to be involved, working with partners, including, I think, IUCN, other NGOs in the project's development. And of course, we're trying to broaden the number of actors that are coming into this to provide further credibility and so forth. So looking very much at downstream food and agriculture players, yes, large companies, but also SMEs and startups. There'll be two ways phases for getting involved with the AgriLife label. The first will obviously be agreeing the farm charter, if you like, of principles allowing access to the label and the network, the minimum good standards to enter, and then there will be an evaluation that will need to be completed after that, and will include identification of the right pilot projects, publication of the technical sheets, dedicated workshops, such specific farmers advisory services, and the likes, all underpinned with the right communication channel. I think if we look ahead, certifications at the farm level and the communication to attach them, they have to be robust and credible, and then they can, I think, be important instruments that can be further, reinforced and developed at EU level. And we've touched on it a little bit this morning, Jürgen. We talked about consumer demand turning towards more transparency and sustainability, and particularly in this area of declining in agriculture, biodiversity, climate change, and policy. I think that the AgriLife scheme can play a real role in identifying those good practices and efforts that bring together the whole community to guarantee the quality of European farm management. So I think, at its core, what we're trying to do with it is to create a label that will empower and motivate and drive farmers and land managers to get involved and take an active role in shaping the future of agriculture in Europe. And I think, hopefully it can fill in some of perhaps the missing links at the farm level, land level, between what CAP, Biodiversity Strategy, Farm to Fork Strategy, and indeed CAP is trying to do, and we can get some good outcomes all around. So early days in terms of shaping the label up, but we're very excited about it, and we think it can play an important role. I'll hold it there for now.
Okay, thank you, Mark, for those insights, and glad to hear that you're even solving a number of questions which were asked earlier on in this session about labeling. We have two kinds of questions coming in, but all of them are one or the other way related to eco-schemes. And the first set of questions that I see emerging is about innovation, precision farming, carbon farming. And the question is whether today those eco-schemes have enough thought about innovation, precision farming, carbon farming. And I think this is the kind of question I should go maybe first to Arnaud. What do you think? Should, for instance, precision farming, which is under development, be an important element within the eco-schemes?
Yes, it can be a solution. Unfortunately, until now, in my country, and I don't know the result in the other country, the government don't want to implement precision farming as a way to accede at the eco-scheme.
Okay, and I will switch to Geraldine, because if we are looking specifically at innovation and technological development in the European Union, and if we compare that with our main trade partners, are we running ahead, or is that the opposite?
Well, I'm afraid that we are not running ahead. On the contrary, and I think this is really a pity. When you remove tools from the toolbox of the farmers, you need to replace them by something. So the Commission wants to reduce the use of pesticide and more specifically of hazardous pesticide, but this will have to be replaced by other tools if we want to maintain the type of agricultural production that we have. And therefore, innovation can really play a key role here. But unfortunately, we see a willingness of the Commission to promote innovation, but we don't see enough concrete instruments to really promote those innovative instruments.
Okay. Look, concerning eco-schemes, One of the eco schemes is carbon farming. It's buzzing all over the place, not only here, but also in the corridors in Brussels. Carbon farming could be maybe a first successful payment for ecosystem services. But on the other side, we're already speaking for a very long time about ecosystem services, and it seems to be very difficult to get something off the ground. Is there still a future for the payment for ecosystem services from your point of view?
I think that we have no choice but to make sure that there is a good system in place. I agree with you that the academic discussion has been taking too long. It's often also, sometimes one could see it as a strategy to divert and keep on the discussion going and not daring to make any decisions. I see an acceleration happening now, and we will have to agree that the perfect is the enemy of the good. So we will need to have some estimations and allow for estimations, because it's impossible to perfectly measure it, and it will always be an underestimation. But with no value, no economic monetary value to natural capital, we will continue the way we are. I mean, there is a big debate also inside ICN on how to approach this, and we are safeguarding, of course, that we don't turn it into a commodity. Back to carbon farming. I mean, of course, with the carbon price and the fact that there is this system in place, this is quite attractive, but it could result in the same challenges as we've seen with planting trees for carbon and then doing it in the wrong way. And this brings me to the point that all these solutions that we are looking at, which are in fact nature-based, as tree planting, as carbon farming, they will need to adhere to some minimal criteria to what ICN has defined in a standard as the criteria for what is a nature-based solution. Does it contribute to solving the societal challenge? Has it an increase of the biodiversity in the area where the activity is being laid down, the solution is being implemented? Because we are talking too much, it's been improvised on. The term starts to be almost misused at the moment if you're not careful. And I think this whole ecosystem services payment, natural capital accounting, nature-based solutions, doing them right, having a standard agreed, the EU has enormous potential to have this playing field created and then, of course, carry it out to the rest of the world, which, of course, is always the challenge with farmers being under stress of unfair competition from production elsewhere, which we do also recognize and needs to be solved. And then maybe finally on the technology, I noted a very interesting point from Geraldine when she said, when we want to maintain this kind of production, and I think this is the fundamental challenge here. If we want to maintain the kind of production we have today, which is of volume, and I heard, I think one of the farmers, he was saying, we're looking at quantity, not so much at quality. And when we look more at quality and we could look at the whole chain and the food system chain and the production chain, we will also be able to reduce the food waste. And so the price of quality products can be better with social corrections for those that cannot afford it, a direct price to the farmer. So quantity to quality, if we want to maintain the current production levels with all the waste we are still creating, then yes, it will be very difficult to go away from or to try to use much less chemicals in the system.
I wonder, Jürgen, maybe I could just reinforce what Luc was saying there when we talk about some of these solutions, and it's linked a bit to what we were talking about with AgriLife. Whatever we come forward with, it has to be robust and credible. And when we talk about carbon farming or any nature-based solution in particular, as you said, Luc, there needs to be some minimum criteria that have surely got to be based around realness, additionality, permanence of the solutions that are being brought forward. And there is a significant range of solutions out there at the moment. And if this is really going to stand on its own 2 feet, we have to focus at the higher quality end of the solutions that we're looking at. And the more that we can underpin that with robust frameworks and standards, the better.
You're looking at that, Mark, from the labeling perspective. Luc is looking at payment for ecosystem services. If we are speaking about payment, in the end, someone has to pay for it. So my question here is, will the customer be prepared to pay for and will be able to give an additional price to have, I would call it, biodiversity-friendly farming methods? You think that will be possible? And maybe I will first go to Luc to answer that question, but don't be afraid for the others. I will come back to you too.
No, I think this is a very open nerve that you're touching on the price of food. It's of course very sensitive and it has a very big social dimension. We all know that a lot of the price of food is lost in the chain, in the whole chain from the farmer to when it ends up with the consumer. That's the first. I think this local connection with the farmer is one that we should be reinforcing first of all. And I think there's many incredible local initiatives happening. And I think it's a train that has departed and will not stop anymore. And I think many that are still looking at the mass production and that are in a different way, they will soon come to terms. That's the first. Second, the price, so as I said, to have a fair price for the farmer, it doesn't mean necessarily that it has to be a much higher price for the consumer. Secondly, the production methods under a framework of nature-based solutions, if you like, not necessarily need to become much more expensive. And then thirdly, who pays for this? And now it's of course important to repeat the point on the common agricultural policy. We are 1/3 of the European budget goes into currently 90% of that to pure production support. I mean, that doesn't make sense anymore in this world. It doesn't make sense in a Green Deal perspective. And especially when you then ask people who's going to pay the price, and you look at so much public funding that is not used for the public purpose, that's actually a question that is maybe a bit of crossing a bit of a red line. So let's first see we get the public funding in the right place, so then the food prices may not have to rise too fast immediately.
Or no, you think that the farmer can get a fair price without, let's say, augmenting the prices on the consumer side if you want to include more and more payment for ecosystem services?
I want to complete the purpose of Luc first. I think that all the money we receive from the EU is linked to conditionality. All the money we have conditionality. And in the conditionality, you have sustainability always. You can put more and more conditionality, but if you put more and more conditionality, you need at the same time to have some coherence in the European policy. You know, we are in discussion, or the discussion are closed, and we try to put an annex at the Mercosur agreement. How is it possible on the side to be very clean in Europe when you open the border to produce who are not fighting or with the same way of production? Really, it's unfair. The level playing field, everybody knows this word since the difficult negotiation with UK. We are not in condition of level playing field with countries like Mercosur or like Australia tomorrow. We are not in Europe feedlots at all. And really, where is the coherence? You want always a coherence policy for CAP and biodiversity, and at the same time, some people, the Commission, negotiate the Mercosur. It's really incredible for me. I can't believe that we will be leader on the side and loser at the other side. I want to say that. About the price, it's the relation in the food chain who can give you the price, and really the importance of labeling and the origin labeling in Europe. It's something fundamental. When you are able to write the origin of the produce, you can get 10% more than an unknown produce. And that's why it's fundamental to go forward in the direction of origin labeling. I know that part of the people in the Commission are opposite to this idea, but really it's a solution to create value.
Geraldine, If we are developing eco-schemes towards carbon farming, precision farming, and so on, in the end, we are asking more and more efforts from our farmers. That is having an effect on the price. What would be the effect on international trade of our agriculture products?
Well, I think, you know, the eco-agriculture is really included in the global agricultural trade and global agricultural production, and this should remain the case. And I'd like to come back on what Luc said about quality versus quantity. Of course, we all want to have a better quality food, and I can tell you, we have already a very high quality food in Europe compared to other parts of the world. However, I think Europe has a responsibility in helping feeding the rest of the world. Many countries cannot feed themselves because they don't have the land, because they don't have the yield available, the technology to produce enough yield, or because they are at war, or because of natural disaster, and they cannot feed themselves. And I really think that the European Union has the responsibility to help feeding those regions. I think that if we put too much constraints on the European agriculture, we might put that at risk. Now, obviously, it's not an excuse not to do anything. We know that we must act on biodiversity, and we know that we must restore biodiversity. And in fact, many initiatives are already taking place. The point is, it takes time to deliver results and concrete results. But we need to do more, and there is no question for that. And at CropLife Europe, in our industry, we constantly work on improving our products, in diversifying our products with biopesticides, for instance, or with digital tools, in order to reduce the impact of our products on nature and on the environment. The point is, we need also the proper regulatory framework that will enable these technologies, these innovations, to reach the European farmers. Otherwise, we will have this kind of dichotomy between what is asked for European farmers and the rest of the world.
Okay, thank you. Mark, I would like to end with you. The AgriLife label, what do you think? Within such a label, are you capable of bringing the two strategies together, CAP and the EU Biodiversity Strategy 2030?
Just repeat the question again. I'm not sure I quite follow it.
Well, we are discussing two strategies, CAP on one side, CAP, Green Deal, and so on, agricultural aspects. On the other side, the EU Biodiversity Strategy. If you are setting up a label as AgriLife, you think that you're capable of bringing the two strategies together?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, as I said in the overview of it, what we're trying to do is to demonstrate long-term economic benefits that accrue to land managers and farmers by adopting practices that will also make them environmentally sustainable. We've talked for many years in these types of forums that these two things are not mutually exclusive, and I think a label and a process that is robust and credible, that is able to measure and demonstrate that the practices that are undertaken by growers deliver them economic benefits to their farm, but also the environmental sustainability benefits and protection that comes from that, has to be a win for them under the label. Now, if they can then get paid for that by being able to use the participation in the label to access eco schemes, to access private revenue from the downstream food chain, from consumers that might want to invest in it, from philanthropic organizations that might want to invest in it, then I think we've achieved something, and we've practically brought the two strategies together.
Okay, thank you. There are many more questions coming in, but I am afraid that we have a strict time limitation. And that makes, I would like to thank my panelists for this session. Thank you very much for being with us, whether it was digital or physical, Mark. And normally this is the moment that I have to make a summary and come to conclusions, which is quite often a difficult task. So I have some good news for myself. I don't have to make the conclusions because we have found someone else to do that. And that is no one less than Alvaro Amaro, member of the European Parliament from Portugal, president of the Biodiversity Hunting Countryside Intergroup, and he will join us physically. Please join us at the stage. And if I can ask you to take the seat next to Mark. Mr. Alvaro Amaro, I leave the conclusions to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me to say something about this important summit and the important theme. First, I want to congratulate ILO and our national confederation for organizing such a good event. It is outstanding to have here in Santarém so many high-level speakers to truly discuss important matters as farming and biodiversity. And for you, my dear Thierry, once again, and thank you so much. I'm very, very glad to be here, and I'm so proud here, like the president of our intergroup, and my congratulations to Willow, and thank you so much. And os meus agradecimentos também, naturalmente.
And I'd also like to thank the CAP, our national confederation. And it's important to realize that for many, many years, Portuguese agriculture has had its role, has had its issues, its problems, but Portuguese agriculture is part of European agriculture. For many years now, we can't just look at ourselves because we share a wider space. That's why today we witness such an interesting debate with several perspectives on this topic, biodiversity and the 2030 strategy. But there's a common denominator: the relevance of preserving biodiversity and the very, very relevant role farmers play in doing so. There may be divergences on the impact the sector has on the biodiversity crisis, but what we cannot do is stop fighting. This is a constant struggle, and I keep repeating this. I don't say this because it's politically correct. This is just a feeling I have. We cannot just hold the farmers accountable, and they can't be the only ones to bear the brunt of reforming the production processes. And this is a central topic to this discussion. Agriculture, sometimes unfairly, and I repeat this, unfairly, seems to be focusing on itself, the discussions on environmental protection. And that is a negative topic from a global standpoint. We can never fall into this rut where we pit agriculture against the environment. There is ancient history here, and from my point of view, they are meaningless. That's meaningless now. When we talk about the CAP negotiation, this has not contributed to focusing the debate on the relevant issues, which is how do we give the farmers and producers the means to be more effective and efficient in using their resources, in producing with fewer inputs, and to have a sustainable agriculture with as little impact on the environment as possible. And I think the European Parliament has a key role to play. The pandemic has served to remind people of how of the key role the farmers play. As we often say in the strategy, it has a very clear brand, the farm to fork strategy. It's a clear brand, but it also needs a clear strategy. But I've said this over and over again. We can twist this any way we want. We can go one way or another, but one thing holds true. If there's no farm, there will be nothing to put on the fork. And so we need to have, well, after the pandemic, when life goes back to normal, the visibility will diminish, but the agricultural sector must communicate better without overhyping things. After all, in Europe, we have products at accessible prices and in abundance, and also the best and safest food in the world. Yesterday, I said as much. And our system that we want to keep on reforming, we want it to be more environmentally friendly, but also more resilient. And we know the role of biodiversity is unquestionable, but the farmers also have a key role to play. And if we see that the European Union instruments are not directed towards halting the loss of biodiversity in farm areas, then we should work towards reverting this trend. But we must be fully aware that we can't just restrict the access to many of the existing tools. So coupled with the most recent technological advances, we have to give the farmers this technology and replacing old tools with new tools. That's how you reform the system. And I think I can safely say that, generally speaking, the farmers, producers, are aware of this problem, and they are aware of how relevant they are, and they're aware of their role as being part of the solution. But let's call a spade a spade. They have to be paid for this. They have to be compensated. The farming industry must have sustainable practices to ecologically benefit our lands and to help and benefit society. This morning someone said, quite rightly so, that consumers play a role. Sometimes huge strategies are defined and they have gaps. They're lacking scientific studies to support the strategies. But sometimes they don't look upon the relevant roles the consumers play. Because when you look at the market, you have to think of the consumer choices. And the role of the industry, the agri-food industry, has a role to play. So let's not miss out on the opportunity to move towards a better planet. That won't be possible if we keep pressuring in a disproportionate way our producers. That sends a wrong message and ignores all the steps the producers take towards maintaining biodiversity and maintaining habitats, sometimes in a symbiotic way. Let's give as example the Montado in Portugal. This is a unique forest system in the world, but the preservation of the Iberian lynx. And sometimes it's coupled with hunting practices. Without the intervention of the producers, the farmers, the landscape becomes more vulnerable to pests, to natural catastrophes, natural occurring accidents. We need to maintain our ecology, our ecosystems, and for that we must involve all those who live off the land and who depend on the land. And we need their commitment and our commitment to fulfill our goals. So we must bring all actors together and make them work together to find the proper solutions, like the ones we heard this morning. If we fail now, everybody comes out a loser. And this is not the moment for that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. That is leaving me, before I make my closing remarks, to the closing remarks for this session. And those ones will be made by no one less than Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, President of the Republic of Portugal.
The UN has drawn our attention to the major challenge that will be producing food for an ever-growing population that should be over 9 billion people by 2050. The EU thinks that this challenge must be met in a sustainable way, together with maintaining and restoring biodiversity, because biodiversity is key to the maintenance of healthy ecosystems, without which you cannot produce all the necessary food. For those reasons, the European Union has presented a biodiversity strategy until 2030, together with the European Green Deal and the Farm to Fork. This biodiversity strategy must face up to another diverse challenge, which is each member state has its own dynamic and its own rural reality. But this is a challenge that affects all of us, because one of the main goals for the strategy is to have the countries ensure at least 30% of their land covered with protected areas in land and sea. Portugal is on the right path to reach that target, because 22% of our territory is protected areas. The Commission has set also a goal to revert genetic decline, and that would mean that we'd have to invest in traditional cultures and breeds. We have a huge variety, and with very qualified research laboratories, we can recover many of our more traditional varieties and promote more and more our 57 local breeds that are part of our heritage, historical and cultural. All of this includes a huge potential for social and economic development of rural areas, promotion of tourism, food tourism, rural tourism, nature-related tourism. But the producers are a key element of this strategy, because they are the ones who care for our rural lands, and it's thanks to them that many of our species that we want to protect are still around, because they feed on their cultures. And producers and farmers know better than anyone that food safety depends on biodiversity, because 75% of the food they produce are ensured by pollinating insects. On the other hand, objectives like reducing fertilizers may be a chance to use the waste of our own animal farmers, for instance. When it comes to the use of plant protection products, there's always room for improvement, I'm sure. But Portugal, one of the countries more affected by climate change, is sure that Portugal has made a huge contribution, and our country has been one of those that has most contributed to the reduction of the use of plant protection products until now. So I'd like to leave a message of thanks to all Portuguese farmers that have shown over the past few decades and over the past year and a half, they have shown that they are up to this challenge. It's our farmers and producers who have contributed towards the maintenance of rural landscape together with other country people. And they've also managed to increase their yield. They've managed to produce more with fewer resources. And so, farmers and producers, in their own way, bring quality foodstuffs to the table of Portuguese consumers at accessible prices. And it's important not to forget that this effectiveness was only possible due to the search for knowledge, to innovation, to technology, ever growing, and I'm sure they will continue to be a driver for development in our rural areas, in Portugal and all over Europe. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we are now coming to the end of what was the first Farming Biodiversity Summit. As I mentioned, we have been recording this meeting, and for those who are interested, you will be able to find it back at as well the ELO, the FFA, as the PAC websites. And I would like to remind you that this afternoon you can come back to this channel, and at 1:30 Western European time, you will be able, or 2:30 Central European time, you will be able to follow the ELO Solutions Workshop. And there we are speaking about insights from the EU projects on co-designing research on with rural actors. I would like to thank all of our speakers, whether they were physically present or whether they were present digitally, and our panelists. I would like to thank CAP and ELO, Duarte Mira especially, because all of the efforts he has made in the past weeks. I would like to thank the Portuguese presidency of the European Union. I would like to thank the partners of this event, being CropLife, Concili and Travel Tomorrow. And of course, I would like to thank the FFA platform, ELO and Syngenta, in cooperation with TNC, WWF, Cargill, Thought for Food, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and John Deere. And of course, I would like to thank you behind your screen, because you have spent 3 hours behind that screen just to follow what we were saying. And I certainly want to thank the audience here present in Santarém to be so brave to be here with us. Thank you very much. Have a pleasant afternoon, an evening, a pleasant morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much.